What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Tuesday, July 20th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we have a 13-game slate tonight. Let's see if we can do a little bit better with the pitcher pick here tonight. Whoa, Kyle Gibson. Ouch. You know, that's MLB. Sometimes your guys just go out there and blow up your lineup. Just got to move on and live to play another day. So let's take a look at the pitcher position. I like Luis Garcia with a 15% pitching advantage over a low salary batting team, the Cleveland Indians. Luis Garcia is only giving up a .371 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 5 righties here tonight. Now, Luis Garcia is $9,600 FanDuel salary. He's $800 more on DraftKings, projected at 24.4 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 3.06. His record is 6-5 on the season, pitching an average of 84 pitches per game, averaging 30 fantasy points per game. He scored 33, 15, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Luis Garcia here versus the Cleveland Indians. Now I also like Yu Darvish. He's in a pretty good spot here versus the Atlanta Braves. He is only giving up a .600 OPS versus righties. He's facing 6 righties here tonight. And on top of that, the Braves have only hit 8 of his last 41 pitches. That's a 195 batting average. He's $11,200 FanDuel salary, and he's $1,400 less on DraftKings. He has an ERA of 3.09, record is 7-3 on the season, pitching an average of 92 pitches per game. He's projected at 41.4 fantasy points here tonight, so that's a big projection. So they're expecting big things out of Yu Darvish here tonight. He's averaging 37 fantasy points per game. Now he's coming off of an awful game last game where he scored -3 fantasy points, kind of like Kyle Gibson did last night. Woo! But Yu Darvish scored 30 and 40 fantasy points in the 2 games before that. So I think this is a bounce back game for Yu Darvish. So I do like Yu Darvish here versus the Atlanta Braves. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. batting against Garrett Richards. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is batting a .952 OPS versus righties, and Garrett Richards is giving up a .743 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is 5 for 7, batting a .714 batting average and a 1.921 OPS versus Richards. He is $4,500 FanDuel salary and $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 15 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 0, and 51 fantasy points in the last 3 games. But I think he's going to be a good stud to own here tonight. So I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. here versus Garrett Richards. Now, if you're looking to save a little bit of salary, take a look at Trey Mancini with a 32% batting advantage over Shane McClanahan. Trey Mancini is batting 24% better versus lefty pitchers, and Shane McClanahan, he's giving up, well, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .772 OPS versus righties. Trey Mancini is $3,200 FanDuel salary. He's $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 12, 10, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Trey Mancini here versus Shane McClanahan. Oh, another guy, we had him picked last night, and he did pretty well, and it looks like he's in a good spot again here tonight. Take a look at Joey Votto with a 41% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Robert Stock. Joey Votto is batting 25% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .862 OPS versus righties, and Robert Stock, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 16% worse than his pitch to righties, giving up a 1.039 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Stock yet, but Joey Votto is only $2,800 FanDuel salary. He's $1,700 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 22, 3, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Joey Votto here versus Robert Stock. And one more guy, if you want to save some salary, here's a value play for you. Take a look at Gavin Sheets with a 63% batting advantage over Bailey Auber. Gavin Sheets is batting a 1.171 OPS versus righties, and Bailey Auber, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, giving up a 1.151 OPS versus lefties. Gavin Sheets is 2 for 4 versus Auber, batting .500 with a 1.250 OPS. Now, Gavin Sheets is only $2,500 FanDuel salary, and he's $600 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 0, 31, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Gavin Sheets here versus Bailey Auber. And you know what, guys? There's just a ton of good plays here at the catcher first base position. I'm going to give you one more value play. This is like a super value play here. Take a look at Trace Barrera with an 89% batting advantage over Trevor Rogers. Trace Barrera, he's batting a 3 OPS versus lefties. So it looks like we're going to need a bigger sample size with his at-bats there. But Trevor Rogers pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .748 OPS versus righties. And Trey Barrera is only $2,200 FanDuel salary, and he's $200 less on DraftKings. So I think he makes a great value play here tonight. He's projected at 8.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 25, 16, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Trey Barrera here versus Trevor Rogers. And another good play here at the catcher first base position. I mean, they just keep going. I'm going to give you 2 more while we're at it.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Take a look at Tucker Barnhart with a 60% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Robert Stock. Tucker Barnhart is batting 44% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .766 OPS versus righties, and Robert Stock pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, giving up a 1.039 OPS versus lefties. Now, Tucker Barnhart is 0 for 2 versus Stock, but it's a small sample size, and he's only $2,100 FanDuel salary and $700 more on DraftKings. Projected at 8.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 3, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Tucker Barnhart here versus Robert Stock. Okay, and one more catcher first baseman before we move on. He just sticks out because of his batter versus pitcher stats here. Although his salary is a bit high, take a look at Paul Goldschmidt with a 10% batting advantage over Trevor Williams. Paul Goldschmidt is batting a .848 OPS versus righties, and Trevor Williams throws his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .963 OPS versus righties. Now, I like this pick because Paul Goldschmidt is 7 for 18, batting a .389 batting average and a 1.032 OPS versus Williams. He's 3,800 FanDuel salary. He's 1,700 more on DraftKings, projected at 14.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 25, 6, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Paul Goldschmidt here versus Trevor Williams. So just a ton of options at this position here tonight. Now let's move on to the second base position. Another value play for you. I like Chris Owings with a 50% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Marco Gonzalez. Chris Owings is batting 24% better versus lefty pitchers. He's batting a 1.059 OPS versus lefties, and Marco Gonzalez throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .866 OPS versus righties. Chris Owings is 2 for 3, batting a .667 batting average and a 1.667 OPS versus Gonzalez. He's only 2,500 FanDuel salary. He's 700 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 16, 3, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I also like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 11 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Chris Owings here versus Marco Gonzalez. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like J.D. Davis with a 60% batting advantage over Wade Miley. J.D. Davis, he's batting a .964 OPS versus lefties. And Wade Miley, he throws his worst ball by far to righty batters, 59% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .907 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Miley yet. J.D. Davis is 3,200 FanDuel salary. He's 1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 6, and 47 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like J.D. Davis here versus Wade Miley. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? I like Trevor Story with a 43% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Marco Gonzalez. Trevor Story is batting 17% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .918 OPS versus lefties, and Marco Gonzalez throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .866 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Gonzalez yet, and he's 3,800 FanDuel salary, and he's 2,100 more on DraftKings. Projected at 12 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 4, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we like this pick because Vegas thinks there's going to be 11 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under, so it's a good game to stack. So I like Trevor Story here versus Marco Gonzalez. I also like Jorge Polanco with a 37% batting advantage over Dallas Keuchel. Jorge Polanco is batting 15% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .780 OPS versus lefties. And Dallas Keuchel, he throws his worst ball versus switch hitters, 22% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .757 OPS versus switch hitters. Jorge Polanco is 5 for 15, batting a .333 batting average and a .666 OPS versus Keuchel. Polanco is $2,800 FanDuel salary. He's $1,800 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 16, 3, and 3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Jorge Polanco here versus Dallas Keuchel. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Nelson Cruz with a 39% batting advantage over Dallas Keuchel. Nelson Cruz bats 31% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.226 OPS versus lefties, and Dallas Keuchel is giving up a .618 OPS versus righties. Now, I like this pick because Nelson Cruz is 18 for 55, that's a .327 batting average, and a 1.079 OPS versus Keuchel. And that's a huge sample size, and he has 6 home runs out of those 18 hits. He's $3,700 FanDuel salary. He's $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 16.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 22, 3, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So this batter versus pitcher matchup makes him one of my favorite plays on the slate. So I like Nelson Cruz here versus Dallas Keuchel. I also like Michael Brantley with a 55% batting advantage over Tristan McKenzie. Michael Brantley is batting 30% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .938 OPS versus righties. And Tristan McKenzie, he throws his worst ball versus lefty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .752 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus McKenzie yet, and Michael Brantley is $3,300 FanDuel salary, and he's $100 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. He's projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 12, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Michael Brantley here versus Tristan McKenzie. I also like Jesse Winker with a 46% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Robert Stock. Jesse Winker is batting 30% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .978 OPS versus righties, and Robert Stock pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, giving up a 1.039 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Stock yet, and Jesse Winker is $3,200 FanDuel salary and $700 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 28, 3, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jesse Winker here versus Robert Stock.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.